When it comes to games that define a genre, what immediately comes to mind? For platformers, you have Super Mario 64 and Banjo-Kazooie. For shooters, you have Halo and Doom. And for horror, you have Resident Evil. Released in 1996 for the original PlayStation, Resident Evil rocked the world. It defined horror for many years and gained multiple sequels, a prequel, and a remake. However, as time went on, the classic formula became rather stale. The games were still selling, but after Zero released to some lukewarm reception, hell, it justifiably still gets lukewarm reception today, it was clear that something had to change if the series wanted to stay relevant. Enter Resident Evil 4. This game is widely regarded as one of the best games ever made. It shaped not only how horror games were made, but also how third-person shooters were made for its generation and following. Granted, it also caused Resident Evil to go on a bit of a downward spiral for a few years, but that didn't make the game itself any less good, unless you're a petty purist who turns up their nose at the mere notion of action gameplay. Nowadays, even with stuff like Resident Evil Village pulling a lot from it, RE4 still remains a lot of people's favorite RE game, and even some people's favorite game of all time. I myself don't love it that much, but I definitely like it as a game, and respect it for what it was able to do. Cut to the present day, and we have ourselves a remake of the original game. Many fans were highly skeptical of this since RE4 is perfect to them, but it seems that with every passing trailer, fans became more and more excited for it. And now, it's out for the world to play. What did I think of it? Well, I'll tell you, but first, I figured it'd be fun to not only discuss the remake, but also cover every other version of RE4 that exists. Well, actually, that's a bit of an exaggeration. I'm not going to delve into every single part of the original, which there's a shocking amount of, but I am going to stick to three main versions of the game. The original game, which I played on my Nintendo Switch, the VR port that released a couple years before the remake, and finally, the remake that just released. And by the end of the video, I will rank them all to see which one is the best version of Resident Evil 4. Though I should clarify something in case any RE4 fanboys decide to get up in arms about this, all three are worth playing. These are all great games. The ranking will just show which versions I prefer over others. You're free to prefer whatever version you wish. That's how opinions work. So without further ado, let's jump in to the original Resident Evil 4.
Resident Evil 4.
Let's start with a small plot synopsis. 6 years after Code Veronica, which seems to have been forgotten by Capcom, Leon S. Kennedy is assigned to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, somewhere in Spain. While on mission, he finds that she's been kidnapped by a religious cult group called Los Illuminados, who plan to use a parasite they've injected into her to infiltrate the American government and take control of the country. Turns out Leon was also injected with the parasite, and from there, Leon fights his way through infected villagers, monsters galore, and the cult leader Sadler before removing the parasites and making it home alive. As you might imagine, the story doesn't really take itself all that seriously. There are a couple of serious moments to up the tension a bit, but for the most part, this whole game is campy as heck. There are even a handful of fourth wall breaks. It's definitely enjoyable, but something about how little it takes itself seriously does cause a bit of tonal whiplash. I'm still able to take the serious moments seriously, but the contrast between them and the campiness is a little jarring. As for the characters, we have Leon, our confident, quippy hero, Hunnigan, a special agent assigned to assist Leon who's as fleshed out as she is relevant, which is not very much, Louise Sarah, a researcher who's goofy but willing to lend a helping hand before getting unceremoniously killed off, Ashley Graham, whose only real character trait is being loud, obnoxious, and scared all the time, with the worst voice acting in the game, Sadler, the cult leader, who's genuinely reserved and conniving, Krauser, who's given next to no explanation unless you play Darkside Chronicles, and also Ramon Salazar, who acts like a child even though he's 20. Oh, and Ada Wong's here as well. She's just as mysterious as ever in all the worst ways. That's not even RE4's fault, I just don't like Ada in general. I really think they need to elaborate on who Ada is because I'm tired of her little mystery, as well as her Batman and Catwoman relationship with Leon. How he has feelings for her, I'll never know. In fact, I'd say he's better off with Ashley. Yeah, she's useless and obnoxious, but she offers him sex at the end, so that's gotta count for something. Now let's talk about the gameplay. As mentioned earlier, RE4 was revolutionary in shaping third-person shooters at the time. The tank controls from the previous games make the jump to 3D, and for the time, I can see how this would have been revolutionary. However, nowadays I don't really like this. Turning is stiff and positioning is more difficult than needed. I know some are going to argue that that's what makes the game tense, but I don't get tense from this, I get annoyed. Aiming and shooting is perfectly fine, but the movement feels so sluggish that it leads me to getting hit and it not feeling like my fault. Maybe it's the modern controls of the remakes and newer games spoiling me, but with those control schemes, I feel way more tense and scared than I ever do with RE4. Anyways, to talk about the guns, you have a variety of firearms to unlock. Pistols, shotguns, rifles, grenade launchers, magnums, and machine guns. You get all of them by buying them from the merchant, though one villager who won't kill you on sight for some reason, as well as upgrade your gun's power, reload speed, capacity, and rate of fire. Even though some guns are objectively better than others, you can choose to go with whatever weapon you choose if you're willing to give it a good amount of upgrades. You can always go with the strongest weapons or carry your starting pistol all the way till endgame. You have the option, which is pretty cool. However, one thing that's not so fun, and I'm sure you all are expecting this, is Ashley. For most of the game, you have to escort her through several areas filled with enemies, and she can't defend herself, so you gotta keep enemies away from her or else they'll grab her and carry her away. You can shoot them to drop her, but don't accidentally shoot Ashley because she has limited health. Thankfully, you can use herbs and first aid sprays to heal and increase her health, and there are select moments where you can have her hide in the dumpster while you take out the enemies in the area. However, the former isn't much help given how many times she ends up in the crossfires, and the latter isn't often enough to be helpful. Also, her screaming and bad voice acting doesn't help matters. Moving on to other stuff, the bosses in the game are pretty iconic. Del Lago, the giant salamander, is honestly the best boss in the game. You throw harpoons at it while it drags you across the lake, and you also gotta avoid floating branches and its attempts to eat you. El Gigante, while iconic in no small part to the wolf that shows up if you choose to save it from a bear trap, is pretty simple as you just need to shoot it until it falls down and then knife its weak point. Then again, it's an early game boss, so I can't complain. Chief Mendez is a pretty cool set piece and a scary design, but he's more of the same shoot it till it's dead stick. The second phase is pretty intense though. The Verdugo in the sewers is pretty scary. It's really fast and tough, and the only way to deal sufficient damage to it is to use liquid nitrogen tanks to temporarily freeze it. Funnily enough, I didn't think it was possible to kill this thing, but it turns out you can. Salazar's okay, nothing to write home about. The U3 is the worst boss in the game with a bland set piece outside of the cage sequence that's over and done within a minute, and as much stiff as Gigante without the dog. Krauser's first fight is literally just QTEs, and his second fight is kinda cool. Sadler's also fine, but the atmosphere in the final blow is really great. As for smaller things, there are various amount of QTEs in this game, and they're hit or miss with a lot of people. The ones that occur during gameplay seem to be fine, but the ones that occur during cutscenes get the most flack. I can understand that, but I still don't mind them. Some of them can catch me off guard, but for the most part, they're fine. There's also the extra modes like Mercenaries, which, to be honest, I don't particularly care about. I'm sure it's a fun mode, it's just not my thing. Separate Ways is a mode that tells Ada's side of the story, and it's virtually the same as the normal game, just shorter and with a grappling hook. Assignment Ada is a mode I never played, Professional mode is hard mode, and there are unlockable costumes like these sexy outfits for Leon and Ashley, Leon's RPD uniform, and a suit of armor for Ashley that makes her invincible. Overall, I can safely say that RE4 is a great game, but I don't think it's a masterpiece like so many others do. However, unlike the Sonic Adventure games where I find a lot of love for them heavily rooted in nostalgia, I can understand why people love this game. Granted, it is painfully obvious that the people who love the game are very nostalgic for it, but even as someone who didn't grow up with the game, I had a good time with it.
With that said, I think it's time for a bit of change in scenery.
Hey, I said it was a change in scenery, I didn't say how much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for Resident Evil 4 VR.
Resident Evil 4.
Now, since this version of Resident Evil 4 is exactly the same as the original just in VR, I won't bother with the plot synopsis. Instead, I'll get straight into the gameplay. Short story, take everything I said about Resident Evil 4 and put it in VR. Long story, this is an in-depth RE4 experience tailor-made for VR. For one, you can actually move and shoot in this version, which is not only more immersive than tank controls, but also feels much better to play. The game offers two modes, Immersive Mode and Comfort Mode. The former positions all your weapons the way they be on Leon, pistols and ammos on your hips, shotguns over your shoulder, and grenades and knife on your chest, while the latter just gives you a weapon select. And you better believe I went the whole game in Immersive Mode because I wanted to feel like Leon S. Kennedy.
Comfort mode is for pussies, don't at me.
As for the actual shooting, all the guns behave largely the same as the original, only you have to do the reloading yourself with actual tactical reloads. When outside looking in, it looks pretty silly, but in the heat of the moment, it feels satisfying. Each gun even has their own unique way of reloading and shooting, such as needing to pump the shotgun between each shot, needing two hands for steadier aim on the TMP, and flipping the magnum when you're reloading. Even smaller things like pushing buttons yourself for puzzles and actually inserting and turning keys is really immersive. The only one I don't particularly like is the rifle, since you gotta take it away from your face between every shot, but it's still manageable. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, there are puzzles in this game, but they're pretty brain dead, especially compared to other games. And need I mention how much scarier this version is? It's practically a given since you feel like you're in the action. Granted, most of the game is still more tense than scary, but certain sequences like the sewer section with the invisible bugs, the Verdugo fight, and the Regenerator lab are quite terrifying. Speaking of fights, most of them play out the same, but are more manageable thanks to the modern twin-stick controls. Special mention to Delago though, that fight is leagues scarier than the original. In fact, I recorded my fight with him for you to see, #shameless plug. As for smaller stuff, you can actually type on the typewriter to save, there are subtitles for cutscenes, you can upgrade your reload speed for your guns, which makes sense since you're the one reloading. The Mercenaries mode is here too, but strangely separate ways in Assignment 8 are nowhere to be found. Everything else is here, but they're missing for some reason. I do have a couple small gripes with this version though, and the first one is the QTEs. They're all motion based now, even though the Quest controllers have buttons for you to press, and they're way more finicky than in the original. Sometimes they work just fine, and other times you do the motion and fail. Apparently you could turn off the cutscene QTEs, but I didn't find that out until after I had beaten the game. Another thing is, certain scenes were weirdly censored or cut entirely. Like the bit in the small shack with the woman nailed to the wall where Leon comments about sex discrimination is changed to be about no one being safe, which is understandable. They removed Louise's comment on Ashley's ballistics, which on one hand I'm semi-salty on given it's an iconic line, but on the other hand it is a dirty line. Also, apparently in the original Japanese script, Louise just flat out says that she has big breasts, so I can understand why it was cut. They removed Leon's comment about Ashley landing on her butt, which at that point you're just being petty, and they also removed Ashley offering Leon overtime, which okay, now you got me triggered. But in all seriousness, I can live with it. The biggest problem with this version though is that for me at least, it can get tiring to play. I usually play VR games standing up,
Cause I gotta exercise somehow.
and after about an hour or two, I end up being exhausted. Granted, I could always just sit down, but I feel like that would be less immersive, you know? Regardless, this is a very well-made version of RE4. If you have an Oculus Quest 2, I recommend you pick it up. This is definitely a must-have for VR, and apparently the Remake is getting a VR mode as well, though that's exclusive to PSVR 2, which I need a PS5 for.
Alright, with that out of the way, I think it's time for one more change in scenery. Ladies and gents, it's time for the moment you've been waiting for. Resident Evil 4 Remake.
Now, normally with newer games, I don't like to spoil them, but for the purposes of this video, I am going to have to talk about certain late game sections and boss fights. I will try to keep some story changes to a minimum, but if you don't want to be spoiled, I suggest you either skip to the timestamp on screen or leave for 5 to 10 minutes and come back. The rest of you who either played the game or don't care about spoilers, sit back and enjoy. Now, the plot of RE4 Remake is largely the same as the original, however, there are a couple changes to certain parts of the story and the characters. To start with, Leon is still the badass we know, but there's a lot more emphasis on the trauma he experienced in RE2, which is interesting. Ashley has gone from an annoying useless hindrance to a remarkably mature woman who goes from being rightfully scared of her situation to confident and helpful. Louis Serra now sticks around much longer, and we even learn more about him as a character. I actually felt something when he was killed off this time around. And it's the same as ever, though with not so great voice acting. Sadler is far more menacing and imposing, Salazar is a lot more cruel this time around, and Krauser is actually a lot more fleshed out through additional documents and conversations. It's easy to say that everyone's gotten a great upgrade, except for maybe Ada. Now on to the presentation. First and foremost, this remake looks incredible. The RE engine has made beautiful gains ever since RE7, and RE4 continues the trend. Everything is so detailed and runs buttery smooth. There is occasional mild popping at certain points, but it's largely blink and you'll miss it. The character designs have also seen an upgrade. A good chunk of them remain the same, like for Leon, Hunnigan, Krauser, and Sadler, but there are also changes like Ada ditching the red dress for a sweater, Chief Mendez getting a Mr. X hat, Salazar looking disgusting in the best way possible, and oh my goodness, Ashley is beautiful. Like, she looked cute in the original, but she's positively gorgeous in the remake. As a side note, the music for this game is S+ tier. Admittedly, a lot of the music in Resident Evil is just filler background noise to me with only a few notable tracks, but this game hit it out of the park with the music, especially the boss themes. As for the gameplay, tank controls are a thing of the past, as they should be, and you have full fluid control over Leon. That's already an improvement, but to compensate, the enemies are way more aggressive than they were in the original. These guys will do everything in their power to swarm and kill you. The game frequently gets more intense than the original, and you feel like you're taking on an entire village. Some new things they added are a crafting system that involves mixing resources, which selects amounts of gunpowder to make ammo. That may sound unnecessary since ammo wasn't exactly scarce in the original, but I feel like the remake actually balances out how much ammo and materials you get from looting and killing enemies. Plus, there are different types of resources, and you need a hefty amount of gunpowder for powerful ammo, so keep a keen eye. Ashley is also way easier to escort now. She can still be killed or carried away, but she can resist enemies for a bit and avoid their onslaught somewhat. She also doesn't scream all that much, which is a relief on the ears. Other mechanics they added were stealth takedowns with your knife, the ability to parry attacks with your knife, and knock back enemies that grab you with the knife. Yeah, and the knife is way more useful in the remake, but they also gave it limited durability. Overuse of it in any form will cause it to break, and while you can repair it at the merchant as well as upgrade its power and durability, your only option when it breaks in the field is to use kitchen and boot knives you can find that are significantly weaker than your main knife. So be careful with how you use your knife, and try not to parry Dr. Salvador's chainsaw. As cool as it looks, doing so annihilates your durability, so only do it as a last resort. Speaking of the merchant, he's just as good as ever with all the same services and new side quests for you to tackle. Yeah, this game has side quests that you can do for special currency that you can trade for items, and while most of the side quests amount to kill a certain enemy or destroy a certain amount of items, it's nice that they added these in.
But I know what you're thinking. The previous remakes cut quite a bit of content from the original games. So did this remake cut some content as well? Yes, but for everything they cut, they reworked/replaced it with something completely new.
To start off, they cut the cutscene QTEs, which I can understand even though I personally didn't mind them, but there are still QTEs in normal gameplay that remain fun as ever. Regarding certain areas, the waterfall section where you get the key for the church has been reworked into a cave area that makes for use of the boat in the lake. The path with El Dos Gigante has been completely removed to put more emphasis on the Chainsaw Sisters in the fortress, and I like that considering the second path allows you to basically skip the Chainsaw Sisters altogether. The rail cars were replaced with a chase sequence down the path, which I like since the rail car is just kinda there. The room in the castle with the turret has been replaced by a castle wall sequence with an armor gigante, and I don't mind this since the turret kind of annoyed me anyways. Ashley's section has been changed from a forgettable set of small rooms with the most brain-dead puzzle ever to something out of Fatal Frame that actually got me kinda nervous. The sewer section with the invisible bugs has been merged with a spike pit, which makes for a pretty scary experience. The laser room on the island is completely gone, which I'm not that keen on, but at least Leon did the same backflip earlier.
And okay, I hear you all saying, did they remove the ballistics and overtime lines? The former, yes. The latter, kind of?
Make no mistake, the ballistics line is gone forever. There's not even an achievement that picks up the slack like other famous lines. The overtime line is technically still here, with Ashley offering to have Leon stay close to her, but there's no implied sex, so boo. At least there's an achievement that picks up the slack. Moving on to the bosses, Delago is largely the same, just with a health bar for the boat and no swimming QTEs, but there is a new QTE where you stab it in the mouth, so that's cool. El Gigante and Verdugo are virtually the same. Chief Menace's first phase is mostly the same, but the second phase has him chucking flaming debris and exploding barrels. Krauser's first fight has been changed from just a cutscene to an actual knife fight with some QTEs sprinkled here and there. Salazar has undergone a complete overhaul from a stationary fight that was just okay to a shockingly difficult and mobile fight. Seriously, he kicked my ass quite a bit. Krauser's second fight is mostly the same save for his new grabby arm, and Sadler is also mostly the same save for the bugs he summons, and the new second phase that's more cinematic than challenging. Surprisingly, the U3 has been cut altogether outside some mentions in a few documents, but considering I didn't care for it to begin with, it's no skin off my back. Overall, Resident Evil 4 Remake is a fantastic remake of the original. There are very few things about it that I can safely say I dislike. The only real moment of frustration was during Salazar's boss fight, and even then, I was more caught off guard than frustrated. Everything else was a joy to play and experience, and I even felt a little nostalgic going through old areas made brand new. As of right now, there's only the base game available, with the Mercenaries coming on April 7th as a free update, but hopefully Separate Ways on Assignment A to get added as DLC. Heck, even without those modes, I highly recommend that you buy this game at full price. It's worth every penny, and it seems like even the most die-hard fans of the original agree. Yet another slam dunk for Capcom to add to the pile. So that leaves us with the final ranking. We talked about all three versions, and now it's time for me to say which one I think is the best. Gee guys, I'm honestly not sure. I mean, these are all great games. Which one could I possibly choose as the best? It's the remake. It's not even a contest. The moment I finished Chapter 1, I instantly thought, yep, this is the best version of RE4. Goodbye! Okay, in all seriousness, when making a ranking like this, I need to ask myself one important question. What does the best version have that the others do not? And in the case of the remake versus the original VR ports, almost everything. It has the best story, the best characters, the best gameplay, and the best presentation. Everything you could ever want from a remake of Resident Evil 4 is provided and then some. They went the extra mile to make sure that this remake was as flawless as it could possibly be. And it pretty much is. With this remake now existing, I have very little reason to want to return to the original game. And if by some miracle I do want to return to the original, I'd rather strap on the headset than boot up my Switch. Yes, I even find the VR version better than the original. Not only do I prefer the twin stick setup, but I also have way more fun in the immersive VR world despite how exhausting it can get. Yeah, the motion control QTEs and the unnecessary censorship can be a little annoying, but they're at worst nitpicks that I can totally look past. While I do still respect the original, respect can only get you so far, and I had to admit that I don't see the original Resident Evil 4 as a big epic masterpiece like so many others claim. The tank controls are dated and frustrating. Ashley is useless and annoying. The story gives me tonal whiplash a few times, and while I don't mind them, I can agree that the QTEs can be a detriment. And now they have one version that's virtually the same but more fun, and another version that quite literally fixes everything I disliked in the original, I can't say that the original is the best version without lying to both myself and all of you watching this. The one point I'm willing to give the original RE4 is that it is the most accessible version out there. The remake is current gen exclusive, and even though we're almost 4 years into the lifespan of the PS5 and Xbox Series X and S, they're still not that widely available. Similarly, not everyone is able to afford a VR headset, plus the VR port is exclusive to the Oculus Quest 2, so even if you can afford a VR headset, you still might not be able to play it should you buy the wrong one. Meanwhile, the original has been ported to quite literally almost every console post the GameCube, with the only exceptions being the original Xbox and the Wii U. Heck, there was even a mobile port. A mobile port of Resident Evil 4. It's shit, but it exists. However, does accessibility really matter that much in the grand scheme of things compared to the phenomenal remake and really great VR port? Also, no, I'm not giving it the legacy point either. As influential as it was when it released, we don't live in 2005 anymore, people. What was revolutionary then has aged now. That is a simple fact, and I doubt anyone who isn't blind to my nostalgia would disagree. Speaking of nostalgia, I had this nagging feeling leading up to the remake's release that no matter how amazing the remake turned out to be, people were going to instinctively latch onto the original purely out of nostalgia. And while I'm happy to say that a lot of people aren't doing that, I did find some people who inevitably did. Now, to clarify, if you are nostalgic for the original RE4, then that is awesome. I'm happy that you have such fond memories of an iconic game, and I will never disregard those memories. But if your only reason for preferring the original is nostalgia, then I have a very important question to ask you. How far are you willing to let nostalgia take you? Are you really willing to ignore the dated aspects of the original and disregard the legitimate improvements the remake made just because you're nostalgic for the original? Personally, I do not let nostalgia play a part in any of my opinions when it comes to reviews and rankings. If I did, the classic Sonic games would have been much higher on my Sonic game ranking. In the case of RE4, I'm of the 1% of people who doesn't have any nostalgia for this game, as I didn't play it growing up. And seeing the people who prefer the original only due to their nostalgia, I have to ask, would they really feel that way if they didn't grow up with this game? Now, in case anyone thinks that I'm implying that the original game isn't good outside of nostalgia, I've said several times throughout this video that I like and respect the original game. It's just that I find the remake better executed and more fun to play. It's a simple principle. If I'm not having fun, I'm not having fun. And while I do have some fun with the original, I have more fun with the remake and the VR port. I know I sound like I'm repeating myself a lot here, but I seriously feel the need to do so because I know how passionate fans of RE4 are. They will literally go to hell and back trying to say that it's a masterpiece and that it didn't need a remake. While I can't agree it didn't necessarily need to be remade, I'm happy it got one because it made me love Resident Evil 4. I was able to call it one of my favorite Resident Evil games without resorting to how iconic it is. Every place where the original failed, the remake succeeded and then some. This is the definitive version of Resident Evil 4, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. I'm Tony Sonic, and let me know what you thought of these versions of RE4, assuming you played them, of course. Which one do you think is the best version of RE4, and why is it the remake? Next time, we'll be discussing what is hopefully going to be the second best video game movie ever made. It hasn't released yet at the time of writing this, so I'll be waiting with bated breath. See you next time, everybody!